Curtis, thanks for taking the time to go deeper on a topic that you recently discussed on the Good Faith podcast. This time, we're going to go back to one of your recent conversations with Pete Wehner to explore how Christians are engaging in the politics of abortion. Now, to provide some context for the audience, Pete knows a thing or two about politics. He served as a speechwriter and a staffer in 3 Republican administrations, including the Reagan White House and both of the Bush presidencies. He is also a Christian and a pro-life proponent. Now, Curtis, are you ready to go back to that conversation?
Yeah, let's do it.
The view of single issue voters, and for evangelicals, often their single issue on abortion, it's pretty straightforward. They consider this primus inter pares, first among equals of all the issues. They do consider the act of abortion to be a heinous act, even maybe that it should be a crime. It's about the worst possible thing that could happen or that they could envision. And so they feel like no Christian could in good conscience vote for somebody who is pro-choice. The reality is that if you go back really from to 1980, the person who is president doesn't have much influence at all on the number, rate, and ratio of abortions. In fact, the number, rate, and ratio of abortions has gone down significantly more under Democratic presidents than Republican presidents. Now, you don't even have to believe in cause and effect in terms of as you think it through, but it is a relevant issue if you think that if I'm voting for a Democrat for president, I'm voting for more abortions. That's just not empirically true. The number of abortions under Donald Trump went up 8%. The number of abortions during the 2 terms of Barack Obama declined by 28%. So by the end of Barack Obama's second term, the rate and ratio of abortions was lower than it was in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. Now that raises the question of what is it that drives abortion numbers? And that itself is a really complicated issue. The numbers have dropped dramatically. Since the early 1990s, you had virtually 30 years of uninterrupted declines in abortion number, rate, and ratio. As I said, that turned around under Trump, that went back up. And since the Dobbs decision, you've seen a sharp increase in the number of abortions.
So the data shows that whether the president is pro-life or not doesn't drive abortion rates. But many Christians still say that data doesn't matter. You still need to vote your values. That would be their contention. So if you're pro-life, you should automatically vote for the candidate that is against abortion. In your conversation with Pete, you had this to say.
The other thing to realize is when you boil everything down to a single issue, like abortion, you're actually prioritizing some lives over other lives.
What did you mean by that?
Well, like Pete and you, I do care about the lives of the unborn. You're pro-life, DT. I'm pro-life, Pete is. But pro-life means that I care about all life that has been made in the image of God, including other lives besides just the unborn. So pro-life Christians have to consider these other lives. And so let me illustrate just by the recent presidential election, and I'm not bringing it up to try to re-litigate a past election. I'm just trying to illustrate this point about how when we are single issue voters, it means we're prioritizing some lives and not others. So let's say a Christian chooses to vote Republican from the last election for Trump out of a belief that this president will lower abortion and save more lives of the unborn. Now, as Pete has shown, that's not necessarily true, but let's just say, no, I still have to vote my values. So, but even if that's true, we have to consider there are other lives at stake. For instance, Trump has made very clear that he's going to really cut back aid for Ukraine and its ability to defend against the Russian invasion, which means living Ukrainian children already born, their lives are going to be put at risk and at jeopardy because of Trump's administration. Or let's talk about unborn lives in the future. I really do believe that climate change has been demonstrably shown to be a real thing and going to cause real damage to future generations. This means that a Trump administration, which has indicated it's going to cut back efforts to fight climate change, well, that vote for Trump is also going to endanger future unborn generations. Now, just to be clear, I am not saying that one ought to have voted one way or another in these elections. My only point is that just saying that I'm pro-life doesn't answer the question. It's not a slam dunk like that because, again, if you are just making a single issue choice, it just means you're going to prioritize one set of lives and neglect the concerns, interests, well-being of other sets of lives. And this is what makes politics complicated, because it means we're balancing, different lives and what's going to help or hurt different lives. And it just means there's not an easy answer that automatically equates, if I'm pro-life, I ought to vote this way, because pro-life means being pro all life. And it just means that people are going to have to make different decisions, and it's going to be complex, which actually means that our politics should be more humble, because it is complex. It's not a simple answer. And we should really be careful about choosing to demonize people who voted differently by calling them murderers or against life or pro-death, because the chances are people are just choosing to prioritize different lives.
Well, Curtis, in your conversation with Pete, in addition to your point about the pro-life movement seeming to care only about life in the womb, you also said that the movement focuses only on one kind of political influence. Here's how you raised the point.
One way that I try to make sense of this, Pete, is to think in terms of biblical categories of how God seems to have ordained how a society ought to be influenced. You see three offices that are held in importance. It is the king, the prophet, and the priest. We know that because Jesus, theologically, we say Jesus is the true king, prophet, priest, that they are united, held together in Jesus. So that would follow that the body of Christ, right, the body of Jesus in this world, the church, also needs to hold all three of these roles in unity and in alignment. And that we run great risks if we put all of our chips on one of these roles and neglect the other. We're destroying the unity that God has designed and is represented in the unity of Jesus. And I think this actually is quite relevant for modern Christian politics.
So, Curtis, unpack this balance of king, prophet, priest as it applies to the politics of abortion.
Again, let's remember what each of those categories means. So the king is somebody who wields the coercive power of the state to make people do something. That's what a king can do. A prophet does not have any power of the state. A prophet only has the persuasive power of their message to move people to do something. And then a priest, really, what the priest's role is, their role is to move people by engaging with them in the practical day-to-day realities of their life. They're ministering to them in the concrete realities of life. That's the king, prophet, priest. They have different tools to try to move people. Now, how this applies to the modern pro-life movement and its politics is that I believe the modern pro-life movement has overwhelmingly bet almost everything on the kingly route. It has sought to get state coercive power to make people do something or not do something. So that's really why there's been so much emphasis on getting the president that is pro-life elected so that they can appoint judges in the Supreme Court so that they can wield the coercive power of law. And for the most part, the pro-life modern movement has neglected the prophet role. It has not really invested very much in making a persuasive case, especially to people who disagree with them, on the pro-life vision around abortion. And then relatively little investment also in the priestly role. There's been a little small movements that are what's called the crisis pregnancy centers that's really trying to minister to women making these decisions, wrestling with the concrete realities of an unwanted pregnancy. But the funding for those kind of efforts are just dwarfish compared to how much money, influence, and energy has been invested in the kingly route. And now, again, sometimes you need kingly influence. I'm not saying that's wrong, but rarely is kingly influence alone enough. If people aren't persuaded by, say, the prophetic message, they'll find other ways around the laws, right? The prohibition is a classic example where Christians got kingly power. They did not persuade people through a prophetic means, and prohibition collapsed as a result. So similarly, if a movement doesn't show through priestly means that it actually cares about people struggling with the issue at hand in their concrete realities, well, then people are going to view their movement as simply all about coercion and punishment, not about love and care. And it's going to backfire on them as well. And I think that's what's happening to the modern pro-life movement. It hasn't persuaded people outside of its own internal, adherents. It hasn't demonstrated very substantially love and care to the people most affected by abortion. And so outside of its own narrow circles, it is resented. It is often very deeply resented by the rest of society. And that's what happens when you only care about seizing kingly influence. And this explains the point we started with, that why just getting a pro-life king doesn't result in lower abortions. The prophetic influence and the priestly influence really matters.